productivity increases or even inflation. And it has therefore set up very adversarial industrial relations because there has almost, or occasionally I would argue, been the idea that competitiveness can only be restored through lower wages. Now, we have seen a recent labor deal in Washington State here in the United States concerning Boeing, illustrating that. We've seen similar type of deals earlier in Germany, in Sindelfingen, among other places. So this is clearly an issue that affects both the United States and Germany and other European countries, in fact. But I think the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. I think the experience of some countries, noticeably Germany, shows that it's perfectly possible to be both very competitive and do so with very high wages. And therefore, I think it is particularly fortunate, and we are absolutely delighted today to perhaps have the single best person in the world to address this issue from a labor perspective of how has Germany been able to pull this off. Michael Sommer, today's speaker, is the head of the German Trade Union Federation and also the president of the International Trade Union Confederation, and has actually been, for many years, one of the key architects of the German social industrial relations procedures. He's also a member of the governing body of the International Labour Organization, as well as a deputy chairman of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And I'm also happy to say that, like the Peterson Institute itself, he has previously in his career been a benefactor of the generosity of the German Marshall Fund. Michael Sommer will take the podium shortly. He will do so in his native German. There are, for those of you who do not speak German, there is simultaneous translation provided. I've been asked by the organizers to urge Michael Sommer to speak slowly to give the translators an opportunity to catch up. After Herr Sommer's remarks, him and I will take the podium for a discussion that will be conducted in English, which is the usual Peterson format, with an open Q&A with the audience. And then, right before we close, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung have some closing remarks. Those were my words. Herr Sommer, bitte.
Many thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the very cordial greeting you have offered me. You're very welcome here. And today we have sunshine, luckily, but temperatures have plummeted, obviously. And if I understood that correctly, it's a chilly event. I personally must say, however, that I'm a real surprise that a little bit of snow will shut down a government. My topic, however, is not the snow in America. I'll speak on something different. I will address the issue, the question why Germany is a successful country in an economic sense. The title of today's event poses two questions. One of them is, why is Germany a competitive and successful country despite or because of high wages? The second issue is, what role do industrial relationships play in this context? There are individual topics to be addressed on each of these, and they are also connecting themes. When I now speak on the German system, I would normally do that within an hour in Germany during a union event. It would take even longer, but I was asked to do this in 20 minutes. Therefore, and not to speak quickly on top of everything. And these are very difficult conditions, as you may appreciate. therefore, I decided to have the courage to have holes and to just work out the contours of the big topics. And later on, we will have the opportunity to discuss individual points that are of particular interest to you and to have a more in-depth discussion. There are three topics I want to dwell on from the union viewpoint are decisive for the success of the German model. Let me emphasize, however, that personally I always have a difficulty with the term model, because a model tells you you can copy it, you can multiply it. And I remember a discussion with Mr. Gurria, the Director General of the OECD, who said to me, and then, can the world learn from what Germany has done in the crisis from 2008 to 2010? And I told him, surely some of the individual measures we have taken, you will not be able to copy those. However, but you, in the world, you can copy the spirit in which we did this. That is the spirit that stood behind it. And let me just then summarize on this spirit. I think there are three factors overall that really accounted for the success of the German model. The first factor is the factor work. You have to see that we in Germany have a workforce of about 40 million people. 11 million of them work in the industrial sector. That means we have in difference to many other European countries, we have a very strong industrial sector. Unions also put a lot of emphasis to retain and maintain this industrial sector, because we don't want to go the path of Great Britain to make our country totally dependent upon financial markets. And we are also deeply convinced that you can't make a country competitive by having people cut each other's hair. We all need productive capabilities. And therefore, we defend this industrial country, Germany. In doing that, we do that on the basis of an incredibly good training and education of our workers. In difference to many other European countries, our workforce is principally formed in the campus and not at universities. We train our people at the workplace, in the companies, and we have a combination of theoretical and practical training that we call that a dual system. They're meshed with each other, and we have a skilled workforce that is highly qualified and is highly motivated. It's very, very well trained, and many and that can compete without trouble with engineers who come from the university education system. That's one of the most important factors why we are so successful. The second point is that we, after some very, very difficult discussions in the unions, very hard discussions within the unions, we took the path of high work flexibility and high working time flexibility. You will hardly find a country in which workers are as flexible as they are in Germany. In difference to the United States, they are not regionally mobile, but they are mentally mobile, and above everything, they are very flexible when it comes to their working time. I know factories in Germany and people in 1 year only working the same shift twice a year. And that has to do with the fact that the machines need to be utilized optimally. The multiple shift is the rule in Germany, 3-4 shift operation. When one shift closes down, then the crisis starts. That means we have developed a system of an unbelievably high working flexibility and working time. And that was developed jointly between unions and shop stewards and employers. Without the contractual regulations, that would have been impossible. We have working times regime. We have the worker participation, what we call the service and work plan, and also wage agreements. In the wage agreements in the last years, we additionally took the path that we included in that wage contracts. We have we have sectoral wage agreements, for instance, the electrical industry or the automotive industry. We have the possibility, and through the wage agreements, we create the possibilities that the companies have a flexibility departments that are adjusted to their situations, and that's one of the most important secrets of our success. The third point I would like to mention, we have a very, very high permeability for mobility opportunities within their job. Many people whom you will meet in Germany and that are a little up in their years, they walk the path from a simple worker by continuously requalifying themselves. That's very, very typical for union members. And we took the path what we call the second education path. People who didn't have initially the opportunity for upward mobility, they will get a second or third mobility chance, and to climb up the social ladder, not only through that they become more independent and that accumulate human capital, and that they remain with the employees, and that they have the upward mobility. Let me mention the fourth point, that everything taken together makes it possible to have an extremely high motivation. The working motivation and working morale in Germany are very, very high. That's what you may call German efficiency or whatever, and what sometimes let us appear as though we're a little harsh and a little sad and a little tough. But we're able to laugh once in a while, and we don't always go to the cellar to laugh, as the German saying would have it. But the relation to the work is a very, very elementary relationship. But not only the social aspect that you need, that you work in order to live, but work is for many people in Germany really an essential part of it's a part of the human dignity. And that also creates the path toward a very, very high motivation in connection with work. The next point is the close relationship between the employees and their workplace and their enterprise, their company. I myself come from the postal service, and my life was always determined by the fact that it doesn't matter wherever I was, I'm going to have a look at how is the postal service doing. I have a very close relationship to this area from which I used to work, and the colleagues that accompany me on this trip. And first and foremost, I told to them when we arrived, I said, "Is the old post office still there?" That is, to me, I'm telling you the story in order to show you that there is a very, very close connection between people to their workplace, to their work. That they really are interested in the growth and the prosperity of the company, and that they care about whether they have orders or not, and they care about where their wage check is coming from at the end of the week. And this has become a little loosened. Well, earlier on, it was customary in Germany that you started with 15, 16 years of age. You started with the company X, and you you retired at 65 with a golden watch, the same company. Today, that's no longer the case as much, but there are many areas in this relationship to the employer and to the working process, and also to the colleague, and there is a lot of experiences is accumulated, and that's still a present fact in Germany. And so far, we were able in Germany, both for the employer and also employee side, to avoid this hire and fire, not to make it the utmost goal of business, but to maintain the relationship with the workplace. I continue with the fact of work, and I simply wanted to say in summary that you can't do at low wages. You won't be able to achieve that with low wages. The people know what their value is. The people work a lot. They work very hard, and they want to have their just share. And that's obviously a relative issue, what a fair share is. But value added is being created through the work process itself. We have in Germany a system that we, at its core, that's our wage policy as unions. We look at the distribution leeway from the sum from price increase and productivity. That means we distribute what we have achieved. We don't distribute more. That is a lesson we would like to give on to pass on to our colleagues in Southern Europe, and there are major difference. But when we see that there is very high productivity, then we want to have our part of the cake, and that in the industrial area, it is the case that meanwhile very high wages are being paid. But they are the compensation for very high motivation, work flexibility, high qualification, high skills, high value added, and high productivity. And this, and it's clear, we also have processes. We talked about the issue of Sindelfingen processes, where in the industrial area one has tried to push down wages, to keep down the wages. The employers abandoned that very quickly because the social relationships were encumbered by this. But obviously, because they found out that whoever pushes down the wages also pushes down a workers' motivation. And we can see that in the services sector in Germany, where political decisions of the earlier federal government under Chancellor Schröder, a low-wage sector was introduced. Meanwhile, we have about 25% of working regime that are working at low-wage conditions, especially in the services sector. We really don't have these people in there to say. Once in a while, we have them in the area of industrial services. In that area, motivation sinks rapidly. If you come to Berlin and you wait for your luggage at the conveyor belt, you're going to see that you're waiting longer than elsewhere, because that has to do with the fact that the company that employs the people and the company was sold 3 times, and every time the wages were put down. And the consequence is that working motivation sinks dramatically because the workers don't have a relation. If I'm being dealt with like a piece of dirt, why should I act differently? That means for us the wages is also an expression of the, so to speak, of the viewpoint of the value and of the dignity of working people. And whoever pushes down the wages at the same time diminishes the view of the dignity of these working people. If I today in Germany was talking about the dignity of work, that is this, then it is completely quiet in the hall, however large it may be, because people know that I'm talking about the soul of German workers, because German employees, whether blue collar or white collar, both have a very close relationship to the value of their work, and they view their work as a part of their own human dignity, and they want to get decent wages for their dignity. That means all these competitive advantages we no longer would have if we, in fact, in Germany, for instance, also in the industrial area, would introduce low wages. We have in Germany top wages. There's no question about that. That has something to do with the second factor, with which I'm going to address now. And that is the topic of, and now I have to quickly look at my manuscript. And this is about economic structures, the business structures. I've just talked about people have a very close relationship to their enterprise, to their company, their workplace. That applies to pretty much all enterprises, regardless of size. And when you talk about Germany and about German economic activities, you will think about enterprises like Volkswagen, like Bayer, Leverkusen, like Siemens. But German Telecom or the DHL, these are global market leaders. Large enterprises, enormous enterprises, more than 100, several 100,000 employees. But the core of the German economy and the core of the people's work is not the large companies, but they are the small and mid-sized enterprises. And the strongest and most innovative are the mid-sized companies. That means companies between 500 and 2,000 employees. They are highly specialized. They are, so to speak, they can be managed relatively easily. They don't have problems like many big corporations to get uniform management structures. And they are the enterprises that can prove that they're the most innovative when it comes to the implementation of technical progress in production. And when you look at our small and mid-sized companies in the automotive or in the machine engine, pharmaceutical and chemistry, you will find that many of them are simply world market leader because they have found their niche, because they are highly productive within that niche, and they also can sell very, very expensive machinery. You know, you have to get a profit of what you're selling, but they're highly productive, and they are sort of the connection between the qualifications of the workers with this economic structure really creates the second link to the success factor. You will see when you look at Germany more closely that in the areas where we don't have a relevant economic structure, where we have tiny little enterprises or one large domineering enterprise, and becomes very, very, very quickly dependent on the global market and structural changes. We see that in the example of East Germany, where we practically had to rebuild an economic structure because the old structure from the time of the Stalinism was not competitive there. There hardly any mid-sized companies grew up, and with the consequence that it is very, very difficult to implement. Where it really was successful in the metal industry, they are in part much more productive than German companies. But that's the exception and not the rule. I just wanted to tell you with that, when you look at the world map in Germany, you will see that the southern part of Germany is particularly productive, where we have a structure in which small and mid-sized companies domineer, and where there is when deals decently with workers, where there is a regard for human work, and where there is a political framework, and also that so. To maintain this type of structure. Sometimes in many parts these are also family enterprises. That means they're actually personal and persons owning this enterprise. There are changes at present, but the basic structure I have described to you, that is still our major advantage. And when you in Germany as a political party want to be successful, you must talk about that you retain the structure of small and mid-sized, including the taxation question. And let me just add to that, this is an unbelievable model of crafts areas that are the connecting line between industry and production toward the service. About 5 million people are in this area of handcraft area, and just to give you an idea, in the automotive area, people that maintain and service cars, 500,000 people are working in that. When you think about small and mid, the third factor, which I want to address very briefly, is the question of what you're talking industrial relation, and I call it social relationships. All of this would not be feasible if we did not have a strong system of special industrial relationships. These industrial relationships do not eliminate private ownership. German companies are in private owners, and they're being managed in order to be profitable. So we are not at a different globe from you. They are managed and operated in order to be profitable, and that profit is not bad. However, what we have to see is that we do have a system of industrial relationships which is characterized especially through a public system of social systems, of public system, that working men and women, regardless of whether they are in the industrial or the service sectors, any other sector, that these people are secured against the standard risks of everybody's life. We all have those risks. That is health, that is unemployment, that is disability and old age. We have public systems. We have a public pension system, public health systems, always with some private elements. A public system of old age care, and that is in an aging population. That's a big problem in Germany, and we naturally also have a public unemployment system that's financed from contributions by employers and employees, that's being deducted every month from the employees' wages, and that is the one framework, namely the framework that the people have social safety. The second is that we have a system of participation, worker participation in companies that means a little bit of democratization of the working, especially when it comes to formation of the workly and ensure important decisions that the interests of the working people and their close relationship to the companies is being taken into account. That is a system that doesn't necessarily make everything quicker. It's not always very comfortable for the employer. Let me say that because I too am an employer of 2,000 people in Germany, and I also have a Stabssteuer. I know what that is. I know what that means. That's not always pretty, but it creates an unbelievable relationship of, so to speak, let me not say with the Japanese term of harmony, but a very, very consistent working relationship, very predictable working relationship. People participate in decision-making processes, but this participation only works because they also share responsibility for what happens at the work. When you say, for instance, let me build a new production street, and I need to continue to operate the old one while I build up the new one. And the corresponding union member then says, how can we agree on the shifts to work without having a production sales then? One talks about how vacation time needs to be operated. The elemental questions of workers' organization in the company. This is sometimes it's being elevated at a higher level. At a company, and we decide on the sale and purchase of companies, of investment programs. We talk about entrepreneurial basic decisions. Whether it is Team Mebel USA has it to be sold, because I'm saying this because these are the questions that are being discussed, and if in doubt, there's also with the entrepreneurial co-determination that the capital side is always has the last instance decision, but we try to reach a decision that's based on a consensus. It's majority decisions are in the supervisory boards are rather rare. But the idea is that you have to include the side of the capital and the enterprise, and the supervisory boards do not do any operative work because we have a separation between board and between management and supervisory board. The third point, which I want to mention, is that in total this is being accompanied by very, very stable employee-employer relation at the organizational level. We have strong unions with strong membership, very influential in unions. We also have a very, very close relationship to the company. We also have very strong employers and industrial associations, and there are very, very stable relationships between the two. And that is something. If you say that in front of an American Chamber of Commerce, and they also think you come from a different planet, but it can work. Let me just give you an example. The president of the German Employee Association this week will have passed a joint communique, and we have published it because the new government is getting together, and we have made clear we want a sensible immigration policy, a joint interest between employers and employees. We don't want that we come to xenophobia in Germany, and we do this sort of thing together. And the relationships between us, they're stable. They're not always particularly friendly, and they're not always particularly harmonious. Sometimes they are characterized by different interests, but that's really okay. But it is the dialogue, the discussion, that's what functions. And again and again, whether it's energy policy to immigration policies, and so to have a joint position. And now this is the really decisive third factor. These relationships are able. They prevail going beyond enterprises, as unions and as employer association, we take the responsibility for the social system we administer because we finance it. We assume responsibility for vocational trainings, and all the modern jobs that are being developed. They are developed jointly between representatives from employers and unions. The entire modernization of the vocational training, the permanent forms of vocational training, is being done jointly by us. At the time, if I remember correctly, we have roughly estimated about 360 different job training systems that are permanently being reviewed, permanently being modernized. We have the industrial relationships. We have all the way to joint initiatives against the government. We have a shared understanding that we create stable social relationships where conflict is possible. It is allowed, but there's always labor strikes and fights, and there are conflicts in companies but they are it's the exception and it's not the rule. It's like the snow is the exceptional system. The normal case is not that sun is shining always and that you without a winter jacket can walk through the landscape. And this enables, again, a very, very high stability and social peace. We both know mutually that when we agree on contracts or joint initiatives or the initiative about investments in companies, we know mutually that then there will be peace when we have a joint, and we can rely on this peace. That means we have created a system where we absolutely, in the sense of the ultimate ratio, that we do have strikes. If we have labor fights, they're very hard, and we are capable of doing it. It's not as though we haven't fighting experience. We are, and I myself was able to lead one or the other labor fight. But the normal case is that we sit down and we agree at the conference table, and we know and we respect our mutual responsibility and the strength, because the employer association absolutely can be very strong. And this system of social relationships in total, that is something that we then are carrying that forward into politics. And that's the last aspect I'm going to address. We view us unions and employer associations and unions as the confederation of the industrial and the various groups. We don't think we are just any old lobby organizations. We are not just any old NGOs. Rather, we view ourselves as very, very important factors of regulating economic activity in Germany. We also do have a constitution in Article 9, Section 3 of our constitution. It says expressly that that working and social relationships between employers and unions we have a privilege in the constitution that this is something employers and unions do, and this is really something which makes us strong relative to politics. On the other hand, also gives us a major responsibility, because if we were to do it differently, then Germany would not be as successful economic as it is. That means not only do we have the possibility to do something, but we also carry with us major responsibility. And then lastly, let me tell you, when we for the last time really carried that big responsibility, that was the Lehman crisis in 2008 in Germany. In 2008, at the end of the year, we lost 5% of our economic output. Minus 5% in Germany would normally mean 2 to 3 million more unemployed people. It also would mean an increase in companies. And I remember very correctly, and we sat at one table with the Chancellor, Mrs. Merkel, and other federal ministers, and we consulted with each other. What should we do? And at that time, there was something which the spirit. There was a spirit in the room in the Chancellery in Germany, and the spirit was, we are not going to let this country go to the dogs. And in this spirit, we then made investment programs, short-time work, and then we have all the groups together. We went to the banks together. We got interim financing. We have in part, we helped companies to survive that for 1 year didn't have any. The success was that 1.5 years later, we not only had conquered this crisis, but we achieved a functioning economic basis, and the employers that were not thrown out, we helped them to go into the next phase. That means on account of these measures, we were the first ones that were in a position to conquer the Lehman shock. Without the system of really well-functioning industrial relationships, it would not have been possible. And personally, when I'm telling you at the end of a working life, I'm personally very proud that I still live to see how this German model, not only during sunshine times, but that it also functioned during a very bitter ice time. Many thanks for your attention.
Und jetzt, warte mal. Das Englische müssen wir nicht ins. Warte mal. Ja, warte mal, muss man jetzt.
Very good. Well, first of all, thank you very much for a very
Dank.
In-depth and comprehensive speech about German industrial relations and really the secrets of the alchemy, if you like, of what makes Germany the competitive high-wage country that it is. I guess, as usual, I will misuse my prerogative as moderator here and ask the first couple of questions. And I know you said at the beginning of your speech that you really cannot copy the German model, but what you can try to strive for is to emulate the spirit in which it is conducted. But I guess at the same time, listening to you, it might be easy to conclude that replicating even the spirit of what Germany, or in which Germany conducts its industrial relations, is only really achievable if you have the kind of consensus country or consensus democracy that Germany is, both compared to other European countries, but certainly compared to the United States. And the conclusion would thereby be that you can only really emulate the spirit in other Northern European countries, which perhaps share this consensus society. So if you were to think about how do you get to that spirit in other less consensual countries, what are the more concrete steps that the labor movement, but also the employers could take to move in that direction in other countries in Europe or in the United States?
Much has to do with the historic development in Germany. This economic model I would like to repeat, much of what has developed in Germany is a product of our history. Following the very bad experiences of German fascism, much which is praised as economic medals was given to us by the British and the Americans. For example, Germany in 1951, it was said there were still the commissaries of the Allied forces who had to sign every act. Much of what has came about with the help and under pressure of military forces. But at the same time, it had its origin in positive experience. But on the other hand, there were the First Works Council, following the first German Revolution, after the following first German Republic, Mr. Ebert, much has come into existence, but it didn't really work in the 20s, not because the topic wasn't wrong, because in particular during the economic world crisis, it didn't work. After 1945, we had to start all over again. And then we were very fortunate, well, so to speak, that my predecessors, they really wanted to build this country again from scratch. Without the economic help, for example, the Marshall Plans, we wouldn't have managed to do this. This was the starting point. At that time, we had the opportunity to build up industry, to connect this with new industrial relations. In the 50s and 60s, I want to say this system was developed with the going back and forth of forces. And when we found out that it only works, we do it jointly. Germany was a country at the frontier, and in West Berlin, where I grew up personally, was the example of the free world, which shows that also it can be successful socially. These together, we were able to develop this model. So it has a lot to do with the historic development, and also that we had from the head on the employers and also the employees, we had very clever people who developed that system. And we were always under the pressure that we could not turn to a government as someone who makes the decision or who takes us by the hand, but we ourselves had to make the decision. And this felt to an understanding that we can work together. And there are long groups of people which were really shaped by this. And many works council people and many leaders who really lived that idea. For example, Bosch in Germany. This is a company where from both sides the attempt was made to build up economic relations jointly together. We, so to speak, from many individual models, we came to this one.
Our international trade unionist hat for a little bit and ask a broader question about globalization, where I think it's fair to say that one of the characteristics of globalization is that capital is ever more mobile, and the ability of firms to locate in more and more places is clearly there. And that relative to the mobility of workers, this could or could not put capital, if you like, or businesses at an advantage over labor. I mean, we, as I said in my introductory remarks, you have seen this issue that basically firms will tell workers, look, you have to sign this agreement or we move elsewhere. As the international trade union movement, how should you address this reality? Should you, on the one hand, try to fight globalization, or does it call for a renewed focus on education or other things? What would be your answer to that?
This answer would be made up of many layers. First of all, I would like to say this is not a question for us whether we accept globalization or not, because it is a fact of today's life. It has to do with the technological development. and the possibility to make decisions round the clock, and also to move information around the globe in no time. And I think this is the wrong question. The question is whether we can dominate the globalization. I have to tell you, after my long experience, we are rather at the beginning than towards the end. In many areas, we have not learned to have a handle of globalization. We did not learn to have a social understanding of global movement of companies, or be partial players in that. And we have very different strategies. We haven't led those together yet. Also, we have been too slow in our reactions. Capital agrees faster. This depends on the problems of the language, the various cultures. These are topics which the world over are dealt indifferently. On the other hand, there are areas where we would like to act jointly. With the International Labour Organization, we try to carry out the basic values of the dignity of the worker. We want to create a social basic law, in particular for developing countries, a somehow equal standard of social norms. In highly developed countries, as in the United States, this doesn't have anything to do with it. But, for example, this applies primarily to African countries. Thirdly, we've tried within the international trade union movement to have a stronger emphasis on our activities, and particularly to carry out the aspects of dignified work. This is very extreme. I don't want to beat about the bush with this problem. If I talk about 25% with the trade unions and with the industrial sector of 75%, what we would have to organize and would have a trade union percentage degree of 7%. Altogether, we are too weak. And there are areas in the world where trade unions are hardly not known, don't have any role, and still have to learn. And we also have to learn. And we have to have a long breath and at the same time have a greater understanding. But it works nevertheless. I think of South America, particular in the threshold countries. We have a social movement with the opportunity to regulate work. In a country like Brazil, where we still have child labor, this is not an easy undertaking, but it is possible. There are other areas in the world, for example in Bangladesh, where we have to do solidarity work. I just want to show with these two examples there are different tasks, but we are rather at the beginning. What we have been able to do, first of all, we ended the splitting of trade unions all over the world. But there is one organization. There is one world organization of labor, employers and employees and workers and trade unions. One of them is in the administrative board. We try to have joint norms for the management of work. This is a large area, but before step by step, we are on the way towards a regulation of labor, but on a very low level. By far, we are not on the level we would like to be. And if I only can look at Europe briefly, you just pointed out, not because you come from Denmark. Of course, we have a joint tradition between Germany and Scandinavia. Maybe you're in the Nordic countries, it is even more developed. We are not the best and nicest, no question about it. However, we face the question in Europe: how do I address the problem, like thinking of Greece or Italy? This is a whole generation comes into being. Therefore, I refer to the Marshall Plan because I'm convinced we cannot pick up those countries without economic help. At the same time, we have the discussions behind the scenes whether they should not renovate their own systems, whether they should not have reasonable relationships between employers and employees. Instead of looking at price discussions, we are in the middle of these discussions, but we do this not because I come from a country where, thank God, we have learned one lesson. The world should not heal because of what happened in Germany. We don't want to be policemen or officers, but we want to be part of a dear democratic organization. This we have learned. We are far away, like for example from Spain, and say that people, your system is much better than ours. I know exactly that the Spanish trade unions, the highest goal would be to study. And for us, it would be quite acceptable to have a decent education for our young people. We don't want this situation to come up again.
We have some people who's been waiting for quite a while, so I will call on the mic in the back first. Please identify yourself and ask your question.
Okay, my name is Howard Rosen here in Washington, D.C. You know, sometimes people get to learn a lot by how others observe them. And I know that specifically, especially Germans, don't like to make observations and comments about the United States. But as I listen to your talk, there are some of us in the room that would remember that what you were describing actually existed here in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. And in fact, you alluded to it in one of your answers to Jacob, that actually back in the post-war period, we were pretty similar to the United States and Germany. It would be very helpful, and I'm not asking for criticism, I'm asking for your analysis and observation. What changed in the United States?
Please be indulgent. I'm going to stick to my line to impart observations. I think the U.S. labor movement is absolutely capable of making its contribution to this discussion. When Let me just make one remark, and I shall be very, very careful in doing that. In Germany, too, we have a viewpoint of managers that is oriented at according to the U.S. managerial model, and that is the less taxes I pay, the larger my profit, my income, the better it is. And if others have less than I, this is really not my problem. We have an unbelievable chasm between wealthy and poor. And in Germany, I know one or the other manager who was educated here in the United States and who is trying to introduce this in Germany as well. And we are telling them, well, it's really okay not to want to earn more than others, but there is something called a moral scale in the difference of incomes, and there's also the question how do I achieve this personal economic success? And this is the question you as enterprises and entrepreneurs and managers have to put, whether they think that they permanently, when they don't let their workers participate in the economic success, how they're going to success. I think that this is one of the most important lessons that the capitalists in Germany have drawn, that they know exactly that this success can't be at the zero wage tariff, and it's being paid with a functioning and absolutely tax-financed public system. And we always have discussions that people say we are paying too many taxes, and there's no difference between Germany and US in that respect. And it's being paid by that our people really have a fair share in that what they actually have produced. And I pointed to that context of the tariff wage agreement and the productivity. We don't overstretch the matter. And when a company is in the crisis in Germany, we are the first one that are making an emergency wage agreement. That means, okay, for 2 or 3 years we are prepared to do without wage increases. But the price is going to be that we are not going to shut down the enterprise and we're going to keep the jobs. It's not as though we are not able to deal with crisis. However, but it is the point is in the viewpoint of enterprises and entrepreneurs and employers that they consider their employees as dignified participants, not as small children whom you can order about and whom you can send in and call back out. When I spoke earlier on the topic, I was very aware, and I very often use that term of the dignity of work and the dignity of workers, because I believe that this really is a key factor on how people really feel within a working process and how they feel they're being treated. And that means being treated as part of the work life and a dignified pay. And I think, let me just say at the end, that it can see that the difference between poor and rich is going to be greater and greater. And it can be, and when I mentioned the example of the Berlin airport, how low wages are really impacting negatively on the quality of work that's being performed.
Please identify yourself.
Thank you very much, George Dragnich, formerly of the International Labor Organization, and also a native of Tennessee. So I know that you were reluctant to talk about German models in the U.S., but I wonder if you could address the Volkswagen efforts to create a works council at their plant in Chattanooga. This initiative is coming out of Wolfsburg, not Chattanooga. It's fascinating, I believe, and this really is a German model. Tennessee, as you may know, has both been a non-union state and a heavily unionized state in the same industry, the auto industry, and has been for the past 40 years, so it can go either way. But this German model of the Works Council in Tennessee is something that fascinates me. I wonder if you could address that, sir.
Yeah. Obviously, let me address that, because I believe that, and I hope that that despite all political discussions, this model in Chattanooga will prevail, and that good sense will prevail. Let me say that the opinion that a unionized company and with worker participation is worse off and is not capable of performing well, that the shareholders no longer do have to say there, and that communism is breaking out. That's absolute nonsense. Well, believe me, I come from a capitalistic country. And, well, Volkswagen, too, has private shareholders. What we do have, however, is the fact that we, especially as illustrated by the example of Volkswagen, have one of the highest working productivity in the automotive sector. With the help of worker participation, it begins that entrepreneurial decision to build a work in Chattanooga would not have been possible without the participation of the Labour Council in Germany. We could have said no, but they didn't say no, because we said it is good for Volkswagen to produce directly in the United States. We are a world brand, and we want to produce there where we are selling our cars. And that was an insight of our people, not only on the side of the capital, but the workers. But believe me, when the matter is to make the enterprise more competitive, I can say that a works council is help to make the enterprise more productive. New working time models and improvement in production process are and people participate because they say that this is something that's a part of me. Yeah, I'm sorry if I get a little emotional at this point, but this is a part of me which I put in there. I have a relationship to what I do. It's not just that I'm screwing it, because I know why I'm fastening the screw in a certain manner. And Volkswagen is a corporation that not always was doing well. I do remember in the 90s in Volkswagen in Germany, where they were in the middle of a very, very serious crisis, a really, really difficult. And that's comparable to General Motors as far as the crisis went, and where we through joint efforts of unions and the employers and the Bundesland of Lower Saxony, we were able to bring Volkswagen back into productivity and competitiveness. It's a world leader. Without worker participation, this would not have been possible. And maybe, if I can say that, maybe it would be a good idea if that the people who in Tennessee say that unions are really the worst thing in the world, that they're of the opinion that we are real monsters, that tell them what I told a conservative German politician in Wolfsburg, in the central headquarters of we made a demonstration for the specific legal conditions under which Volkswagen is acting in Germany and Europe. All 40,000 workers that are working, they were in the meadow there assembled, and I had this German politician. Later on, he became the prime minister. You would say the governor of Lower Saxony. I had him at the stage with me. I said to him, look down here, locked in, and the half of these people, and you are responsible for these people, and they're not radicals, they're not crazy, they're not people who want something evil, but they simply want their work and their jobs, and they're looking to you whether they tomorrow will have their jobs. And I think that is something you have to make clear, that this entire ideology discussion that the unions are a disturbance, a hindrance in the whole process that is hindering the accumulation of capital, that we really have to stop that ideology. And these are responsible people who really don't want any more in a list, that they and their families have the happiness to know what they're going to live on tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, are able to educate their children. They don't want more than that.
Thank you. I'm Gonzalo Garcia from the Embassy of Spain. I think that, first of all, we indeed have a lot to learn about Germany and about the intelligence of both the trade unions and the companies in trying to make possible to have high employment and high wages. There are just two facts that seem at odds with your talk. It is that in the 10 years before the crisis, it seems that the real wages in Germany also did not keep up with productivity growth. And so, as in other countries, as Jacob said, the wage share of German GDP is also at a low of many years. At the same time, even with high wages, it seems that it is difficult for the German economy to grow from internal demand, and Germany still has a 6% of GDP external surplus. So my question is, are the trade unions going to ask now for higher wages, which is something that would be beneficial to everybody? I cannot think of someone in Europe or even elsewhere that will not benefit from higher wages. And it seems that before the crisis, workers have been making a lot of effort. So is the German trade union movement going to ask for higher wages now, at least to keep up with productivity growth? Thank you.
If I want to answer your question directly, I'd like to point out the following. Our tariff system is very flexible and heterogeneous. We have that normally we have industry sector contracts, but not all over Germany. But they are differentiated according to the various professions, and our tariff agreements show this. For example, Volkswagen, they have their own tariff agreement. This is very different in the various sectors of industry. I said I come from the postal service. All of Germany just has one agreement, and in other areas we have regional agreements depending on how strong we are. This means we call this home agreements. This means we only make the agreement with the one company. All this has one goal, to not only with wages, but also as far as the working hours have to be focused according to the conditions of that particular company. For example, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. This is located in the former Eastern Germany, and in the southwest, where Daimler-Benz, Bosch are located. Then you will see probably you have a difference in income of 600 to 800 euros per month. We do know in the north the productivity is different. The settlement conditions are different. Of course, we try to do the wage politics that not only a fair wages will be made, but we do this in a very verified manner. I have no influence what trade unions request. This is what the trade unions do it themselves. These bodies, they request, they do the negotiations. This always has to do with compromise. This system makes it possible for us that we will achieve higher wages. The reproach is made that the increases in our wages are not enough. This goes right into Obama administration. Recently, the finance secretary mentioned this to us. Well, this is okay, was our answer. We see relatively clearly one has to differentiate between wage policy of the various branches of industry. On the wages have to be competitive globally, and and the wage level sunk because in the service sector, where we are strong, where in that sector the absolute low wages are being paid, there is poverty. I'm very proud to say this was a very long campaign in Germany, that even in this sector there is a statutory minimum wage. I'm very confident that I still can see this during my time on office, and therefore we will close the gap. The minimum wage does not replace the trade union activity. This is the bottom line. We want to do the tariff policy. We want to continue to act responsibly. Recently, I said to the Federal Chancellor, I told her, return the rights which we need to have the negotiation between the two bodies, then you will have peace with us.
Thank you very much, Herr Sommer. Fascinating. Wolfgang Putzig with DHL. Germany has been an export nation. We as DHL have a great interest in trade liberalization. We like to move stuff across borders. We have spent quite some energy over the last several months on a major trade negotiation exercise between the EU and the US, TTIP for short. I have filed on behalf of our company our proposals. We have looked at others. I have studied in great detail the AFL-CIO's position paper to this transatlantic trade negotiation enterprise. Could you share with us your view? What do you, as the German union leader, expect from a hopefully soon to be concluded transatlantic trade and investment agreement?
You're not going to be surprised when I tell you that the German unions do support a free world trade, but it has to be fair. We have in the International Union Federation, we have a lot of discussion, especially in developing countries. How fair is it really? And I will never request when during the opening of a congress of the Brazilian unions, I was a guest in Sao Paulo, and the local minister, held a crazy talk, and I sat in there. Europeans sat down there in the audience, and the North Americans, and they want to prescribe to us how much growth we can have and how we are to deal with our environment, and we have a right to grow. And then they discussed differently on the free trade. Is it really fair? Does it hamper us? And so on and so forth. With this example, I just wanted to tell you that naturally that's a very complicated question, and that when you really reduce this only to the free trade and then only to the free market, when you reduce this argument to the free market and really then put us back behind the achievements of the American and the U.S. Revolution of 1787, you're not going to be successful. Then what one needs to do in parallel is to take into account the anxieties and the concerns and maybe also the hopes that are connected with that. When free trade means that an American enterprise that comes to Germany is using U.S. labor rights, I can tell you then there's going to be trouble, serious trouble. Amazon is trying to do that in Germany, and at the moment they have a lot of trouble. When it means, or if it means when we say that we don't only observe our mutual laws, but also our labor laws, but we also are creating a basis, a foundation that the people also can have an advantage from free trade, that they, so to speak, can also gain something for their existence as employees, and then it's different. And yesterday I was talking with the colleagues from AFL-CIO. We are right at the beginning of finding our joint position. Now we will jointly, and that's why I'm also very, very cautious with my response. We will jointly try to achieve joint position papers with the help of workshops, and we also with the support of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, in order to see what really needs to happen, what needs to be regulated under such a free trade agreement, if it should be an advisory council where the shareholders and the stakeholders' viewpoints are included. How should we say that the basic norms of mutual economic activity are being respected? And that's a very big job to take into account all these questions. But let me say, according to my experience as a member of the German economic delegation to the Doha trade negotiations, which I participated in 2003 in Cancun, I had the experience that there's only very limited, free trade agreements. It can only be used in a limited way to solve this problem. And just to pretend that you only do this free trade and to exclude these social aspects and the workers as well. Let me say it because I don't want that you have exaggerated hopes. And at the same time, I do. Well, let's do free trade, and it's going to work itself, because then you will have the counter reaction from people, and you will have a debate that they really are going to withdraw. And in Europe, we do have. Let me just sort of mention that, by the way. We do have experience with what the creation of a common market means. We do have experience with that in Europe, because we have in Europe we have the generosity of the movement of trade, of workers, of goods. But during that process, we did not eliminate the social inequalities between, say, Romania and Germany, and the different levels of productivity, and that they become between when we have a common currency like the euros. For you, that's no problem, because you compare California to Tennessee, and on the U.S. dollar basis. That's a new phenomenon for us in Europe, and all of a sudden it becomes visible that you can basically calculate it, that you can see that someone works at a minimum wage for 150 and others at a minimum wage of 850. This incredible inequality, to be aware of that, and we always reject it. And so far we have been successful. Then a Polish company comes to Germany and brings Polish workers and is paying them according to Polish labor law, and that means they only get a fraction of what they get in Germany. And we say we have to say equal pay for equal work in the same place, because we know exactly that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, when the Polish example is being adopted, our people are going to be forced to work for less, and that's the mechanism that's going to be implemented with that. For that reason, we have to take care that there will be social protection even in a free trade zone. This is the details of that are very, very complicated review mechanisms, and but that is not really the point that you can say we are not doing it. That's not a reason for not doing it. And therefore I mentioned this example in order to not to avoid the question, but to make really clear the topics we need to must regulate, and what we can do jointly across the Atlantic, the relationship between workers and unions on both sides of the Atlantic, and also environmental agencies on both sides of the Atlantic. We have to deal with the question on to the extent to which free trade is going to apply to museums, to art, to connection, culture, to health. And there are many, many topics that need to be regulated. And the best thing would be if you would let me to permit a very, very personal remark for someone who comes from a country in which we have learned from the experience of Gestapo and Stasi that okay, let's respect the civil rights on both sides. That would stand us in very good stead. I believe that that most German enterprises are ticking just like the American companies. When an investment doesn't pay off, then they come back, and when they don't get the conditions they had hoped for, they return. As a classic example is China. There was a China boom at one point in time, and every little company needed an address in China. Now, China is not exactly a country of free enterprise, although they pretend to be such a country. And many German companies have returned from China because, for instance, patents were stolen from them. Know-how was being stolen. And they said, no, I don't want that. I don't have to deal with that. And as far as the protective mechanisms are protected under the law on both sides, enterprises are going to it. I know relatively few that returned from the United States. It's possible that they were not successful in the United States. Success has nothing to do with the fact that they were hindered in their activity here, and that they simply were worse than American companies. That happens too. And then the American economy is not that bad that you can't draw a valid comparison. And there are many areas of industrial activity where Germany has lost. And when we look at Germans competitive in the area of IT, we are miles behind the European. We've lost the battle, and I'm sorry to say that. But entertainment, electronics, we lost vis-a-vis the Chinese, etc., etc. It's not that we are just great and we're just good. In parentheses, regrettably, parentheses closed. But I believe that you have to give it to the companies, namely that actually the possibility that they can develop fairly, and that means even though they're making foreign investment, and that's true for American capital in Germany, and that applies for German capital in the United States. And you know that there is one or the other restriction which I don't want to talk about right now, which one should eliminate in the context of TTIP. There's still something to do, and also from the viewpoint of German enterprise, which there's a little bit of a state shareholders, that would be the breakout of a catastrophe. But let's leave that aside. I do know German companies that returned from Germany because they failed. Simply, they failed in the United States. And by the way, it's also the capitalist life includes that you go bankrupt. That's part of the capitalist life. Yeah. Because their people's existence are attached, but the largest share of return from companies that tried to become globalized, that's definitely from China, from East Asia in part, and last not least from Russia, because in those countries where these companies are being regulated, where there is a copycat activity, the market expectation and all that, there's a agricultural machinery branch in Germany, and that's one of the examples. And they thought once upon a time, well, let's see, maybe we can't compete with the Americans, and they went to Russia, and they all returned, but they could see what they had in terms of expectations in human qualifications, workers' qualifications. They were not fulfilled. And so, well, you have to say that a German enterprise used to the fact that they have a very, very high skill standard of workers, and they're also used to paying a very decent wages for that. But we talked about that before.
Apparently, you profoundly know the German situation. And for this reason, I would like to answer to the point. And I don't want to be superficial in that. Maybe I can describe two situations to you about which we don't like to talk that much. 1989-90, during the process of the German unification, we found a labor world which actually was disastrous. And at that time, we have developed a political concept which could be compared to the concept of United States and Texas. Just to mention the dimension of that. At the time, not only did we find a disastrous economic and political situation, but everything what we thought was valuable, what we believed in, solidarity, welfare state, respect of working people, and just a balance of capital and labor. These values which the communists had destroyed in Europe. We had incredible difficulty to organize the people in Eastern Germany. I don't talk just about the normal people there who were longing for freedom and saw their freedom in not becoming a member in a trade union. And at the same time, we had the situation that many workers or employers went to Eastern Germany. But many went to Eastern Germany who not necessarily were competitive. Many companies closed down in the East so that you don't have the competition in Western Europe. I remember many key officials went to the East who were able to make for themselves a career. I would really become angry. I really mean what I say. Something developed which in the trade unions in Eastern Germany is very different from the one in Western Germany. This led that they meant they were only competitive with Western Europe if at the same time they had a low-wage policy. Today, Eastern Germany has about a third less of wages. There, where very highly sophisticated companies came up, they changed their strategy. Other companies cannot report that success. When looking at Western Germany, we needed the minimum wage. In order with an agreement with the big parties in Germany who form the government right now, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. We have an agreement with them that we will create mechanisms which make it attractive again to go into this collective bargaining agreement. Also in Germany, there were many companies and economic organizations. They always knew how they can give good advice on the matters of workers, but who also gave the advice destroy that system. This was also quite fashionable in Germany. not in the industrial core areas. They never arrived in those areas because the entrepreneurs were much too clever. There where the new small companies came about who were looking for their chances in the market and who thought, I pay part of the salaries and part will the government will take care of. And they destroyed the prices. We together with the government, with the two parties, we agreed on a few mechanisms which strengthens the tariff agreements. I'll give you an example to that. We know in Germany the Institute of Collective Bargaining Agreements. There is a collective agreement in order to exclude the competitiveness. This declaration can be applied, and this should be applicable to all. This is tied to the fact that 50% of the employees are unionized. These wouldn't be achieved in some areas of Eastern Germany. We will get legislation which lowers the threshold. It will say that there is a threshold for all agreements, and this has to be agreed upon jointly by both groups, and the Ministry of Labor will do it. It is based on a consensual basis. We will facilitate this procedure. And also, we will form the minimum wage that statutory, it will be $8.50. But then it will be adjusted according to a particular body. Some of my colleagues get not used to that. However, what we have agreed that within this commission, for example, representative of the churches, lobbies, or other bodies, there are 3 representatives of the trade union and 3 of the employer organization. And they will deal with the adaptation, whether the minimum wage will be increased or not. Learning from the crisis, well, the big parties have said, well, this was really worthwhile, this social partnership. But now we will come back to, again, to this new model. Of course, in times of neoliberalism under Kohl or Schröder, we have lost some of this order. You have pointed it out. But now we start again to renew that system, but not only go back to the way the system was in the past, because there was no flexibility there, was not tailored. And therefore we don't call it a return, but we call it a new order of labor, which tries to find a balance between freedom of enterprises and, on the other hand, the requests of workers. And this is going to be a new system. We built on old mechanisms, but in these mechanisms we create new relationships. This is one of the most important points I didn't mention before, because I felt I was a little bit negligent on that. Our system is so functional, is so efficient, because it constantly renews its urge. At some point it is difficult, but we have learned to deal with this system in a flexible manner. On the one hand, to change our attitudes, and or we wanted to say the gap between the upper levels and the lowest is so big. We have learned to deal with this system in a reasonable manner. It's more than that. And this is something, I hope it will be successful. The majority in the parliament is big enough that actually we will arrive at this renewed system. And also then in the East, we will have a gradual adaptation. We will probably need another 10 to 15 years. It will take us about 10 to 15 years to have the same living conditions in Eastern Germany. And some sectors it's even higher. We need time and we need patience, but our goal is in sight.
Hour of this event, and on behalf of the Peterson Institute, I would like to thank you very, very much for an extremely insightful and informative talk, which I think leaves everyone in the room, meaning that all of us will leave enlightened about precisely the mechanisms that makes Germany the country that it is, which means that I have done my job as well as an employee of the Peterson Institute. So thank you very much. And then I will ask the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to conclude the meeting.
Let me add my thanks. Jakob, it's been always a pleasure and a pleasure again. Thank you very much, Michael. I wanted to tell you that for us at the Ebert Foundation, this event today is part of an ongoing effort to build a very strong transatlantic dialogue in the wake of the Great Recession, of the financial crisis, of the Euro crisis. We have made this a topic many times. I think something has changed as a result of the Euro crisis in Europe, and that is, the Europeans used to perhaps, but most likely not know about governance issues in Greece or about youth unemployment in Spain. Michael, you mentioned it. We now know about youth unemployment. Not only do we know about it, we understand it is our problem. And I think something similar is happening in transatlantic relations. You mentioned in your questions the question of imbalances in Europe. The Americans are worried about imbalances, about lack of demand in Germany and in Europe. And so we are worried about questions of demand here that are tied to low wages. We are worried about rising inequality in the United States. We're worried about lack of mobility. The developments in this society affect us just as the developments in Europe and in Germany affect you, which is why we think we need this kind of dialogue, because I think we only have a chance to do, Michael, what you called for, which is a constant renewal. You can only keep what you constantly change and renew. We need to be learning societies. And I thank you, Jakob, for this wonderful event, because I think it's part of being a learning society on both sides of the Atlantic. Thanks very much.